Hello, in this stream, what I did was I did an exaggerated stylized monster face, kind of like a monster face. And the technique that I use is I start by creating a silhouette of the face that I want to create using the spline tool, because that gives me a sort of a freehandish kind of feel. And I can get a preview of what I'm going to model quite early on. So I just take that into account. And in this case, I'm not even going to do the whole head. I'm just going to do sort of a mask. So it's this line that I'm drawing here. And all lines that I think are important about the silhouette of the character, I just make them, I draw them with the spline tool. Now in the front view, I really don't care much about the silhouette, obviously, but I do want to have a notion of what the thickness and size of the head is going to be. So I start with a plane, and this plane then I mirror. And the point of mirroring it is that I have an instance that will simply respond on both sides to what happens on one. And now using the center line that I drew first on the left view, I just create the silhouette of the head. And right away, you can see that I get a sense of what a head shape would be like. And this is just the other step, which is to then go into the inner vertices that you've created by duplicating the edges and actually moving them into place in order to start creating this three-dimensional form. Now, unfortunately, because of this technique, there's a lot of camera movement, and I know that there's a lot of snapping of the model angle, but hopefully you'll be able to follow along. Using the polygons from the side of the face, I draw, or at least I clone, the silhouette for the whole face. And this part, I really didn't pay too much attention, at least at this stage of the modeling, because I don't have an idea of what the model's going to end up looking like so far. Like the eyes are too close together in this stage, but I do want to have some shape onto the mesh. So I'm going to leave it like that for now, and then I'll come in and revisit the volume of the head to give it more interest. And this technique is a lot based on duplicating faces. Duplicating edges. So you have an edge, you clone it, and then you just move it around, and you basically populate the mesh. But what you want to do is you want to start with the key elements. You want to start with the eyes, and you want to start with the nose, and then the mouth. And when those are completed, or at least when those are sketched in, you can sort of cover up, in a way, the polygons or the areas of the drawing that are more smooth. So for example, the forehead or the cheeks or just the chin, because those are kind of easy to model in comparison to the mouth and nose, which have more specific details. And that's what I was doing there with the forehead. I was just sort of closing up that part of the mesh. Now in this case, I duplicate a polygon there, and there's a few triangles. A lot of people run away from triangles like it's the plague. Sure, it's better to do things with quads, but triangles don't really ruin your model if it's going to be a low polygon model, if you're not going to be doing any turbo smoothing, or if you're not going to be doing any subdivision on it. In this case, what I'm trying to do with a mesh here is kind of help myself also later on when I'm doing the UVWs. And here you can see me kind of play around with the shape of the face, or the front view, which is something that I was talking about, how I didn't do that initially, but then when the model is more fleshed out, I get a better sense. And this is just closing up the polygons. Now, as far as the model goes, I think I have all the mesh that I need, but there's adjustments I need to make. So I make this little bend here at the lip just to get a little bit of shading if eventually I'm going to use that. In terms of shading, also allow the lip to have a little bit of shape by moving it. I think the center of the nose, the bottom center of the nose, I'm going to pull it down a little bit. And also the shape here of the forehead a little bit, because it's the eyes are really sunken in. With no smoothing groups, there's a double vertice there, double vertex. With the shape of with using just one smoothing group, everything looks very balloony, almost like it's an inflatable model. So either you want to play around with smoothing groups, will create hard edges, or you just want to use a lighting on the texture. Now for the UVWs here, I'm trying to relax a few times and it's not working, so I'm going to use Pelt. But Belt creates this view which is different from what mostly you see on a UVW texture, which is you have the center line of the face all squashed together. The problem with that was that I wasn't being able to find like the proper alignment for that. I felt I wasn't being successful at that. And when I tried the checkered texture on it, I knew that there's a lot of warping, and I really didn't like that. So I went for the pelt texturing, which allows the texture to be more smooth across. And then I just get a texture from that. In this case, I do it a 512 because I think that's the adequate resolution for what I want. In this case, I'm going to use a symmetry modifier to keep the smoothing groups correct. Also, there's I think a couple of vertices there that weren't working. In this case, I do have a few tricks when I create UVWs. But to simplify things, I'm just going to go in with the simplistic UVWs in one layer and then sketching on another layer. I make the UVWs quite dull, quite transparent, because I really don't need them, unless at the beginning to orient my sketches. But then as I start to see the texture on the material and on the model, then I don't need it. So I basically import a PSD file straight into the materials. And then whenever I save the PSD file, Max automatically updates it. And so that's cool in this case. Also experimenting here with painting a texture using the viewport canvas, but that's, I tried to get it to work. It didn't work, so I just ignored it and just went for Photoshop as my sketching tool. So just draw a few things, and you can see it in the model. I'm going to make the model full brightness because there's something. There we go. So now I know that the position of the eyes is a little weird, and I just played around with that for a lot. I want to get these right before I try and do any shading or anything like that. So I want to get all these lines correct, and I define the shadow parts. And when I see that those are well placed, then and in this case I bring the transparency, the self-illumination back up to 100%, so that I now only use the lighting from the texture. And as you can see, with really broad strokes, I put in some lights and darks. And this is basically an iterative process of just adding more shades to your drawing until you're happy with how the volume is reading. So right now I have the highlights, and those really make the top-facing surfaces to show. I don't like to use the term to pop, because that sounds like you don't know what you're talking about. But in this case, I just use black and white because not because it's the best technique to use, but because this was a stream and I wanted to show people. And if you put in color in the mix as well, that's more information for you to show, and in this case I'm not really teaching anything, but just displaying and doing like a demo. So just black and white lets people just focus on the shadow and understanding why there's a shadow here and there, and not in other places. So for a while, I'm figuring out whether I want to follow the mesh or if I want to create my own volume using the texture. If I do, I'll have to have the mesh then adjust slightly to the texture. I'm doing a bounce light here on the nose. It looks okay, but it's a little too bright. So I flatten it out a little bit by having a constant color throughout it and creating this little bump under the corner of the mouth also, just to add a bit more interest to the shape. I mean, you don't want to have a face that's got a plain color, up and down. You want to have some variety, some detail in the face. So that's why it's important to learn about the position of the muscles and tendons in the face, so that when it comes time for you to add detail, you can use that knowledge to add detail that makes sense. In this case, I'm trying to shade that part here, but it turns out it looks almost like hair, because there's no transition and there's no reason in logical terms for a dark area to be there. There's no shadow because I didn't sculpt the a carved in part on the face. In this case, I'm just fixing the edge of the face, and I'm using the smudge tool a bit because I have a lot of brush strokes and certain areas are very flat. So I don't feel like the brush stroke should be, right next to smooth areas, and I don't want the brush stroke to be the main element of this. I want it to be more the shading and the detail and the form of the face. So I just made quite tiny pupils. I don't know, maybe because this guy's supposed to be a villain. I do try and have some bounce light underneath the eyebrow, but it totally fails, so I just don't use it at all. Just leave that as a shadowy area. And that was me showing what excessive smudging will do to your sketch, so be careful using it. A little bit of texture there for the lips, which is pretty much just drawing a darker tone to simulate creases in between the certain bumps on the lip. And I think at this point I'm going to start by adding a little bit of whites here and there. Now I think I might leave that for after I have the color. Now the way that I do the color is I create a adjustment layer on top of the base layer, and the adjustment layer works in a way that you can add any color to certain parts of your black and white spectrum. So whatever color you decide is going to be the black, then black in the drawing becomes that color. So you can have, instead of going from black to white, you can have it going from dark green to bright green, or you can have it going from dark brown to bright yellow, for example. And this is kind of what I try and do here. But because I want this guy to look kind of natural, I can't just go in and have a flat color. I need to have some hue variation. And this kind of dark green sort of helps. But it's more important that I have blood flowing through the face so that it becomes alive. And what I do is I add this blood in sort of an overlay mode, or in this case the color mode, I think it is, and just play around with that, getting rid of some of the highlights and then maybe adding them back in, but using my own colors. That allows for the face to start having this kind of alive look. It's probably easier if you're doing, if you want to do your own texture, to actually start painting in with colors right away, almost like if you would in a oil painting. But it's much more harder to tackle that since most of the time you're kind of guessing, because there's no environment to provide you with what does the skin look like in this environment, and it's going to vary depending on where you have your light. So for the most part, you kind of go, you know what, let's just do a basic skin tone shading, and then we'll add the colors that we already know, like the forehead is a little yellower and the cheeks are a little redder, the nose is also a little redder, and then the lips obviously also red. And if it's a male character, it's going to have, if he's got a shaved beard, then you're going to have a little more gray around the jawline and over the top lip, because it's the black of the beard or white of the beard sort of fighting with the saturation of the skin tone. And now that I have the skin tones the kind of that I like, I can color pick tones from it and paint over. So I just added a few details here. And what I'm doing now in Max is adjusting the mesh so that it responds to what I wanted to have in the model initially, or decisions that I took as I was painting the texture. I'm doing a little bit of edge turning just to show how important it is to sometimes have the edge turn differently. And I end the stream by doing an animation of the face just going from one side to the other, which is kind of, some people in Twitter told me it was creepy. I accept that totally. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'll see you some other time. Bye.